Evening, I'm Ted Koppel, and this is Nightline. Even some of the ads themselves raise the issue.
You know, there's a question whether any of these anti-drug messages ever really work.
And some critics charge they can hurt as well as help.
And there's always a real risk, I think, that if you heighten the interest that people have in drugs, they might get a bit more curious than they were before.
Among our guests, former pro football player Mercury Morris.
This is ABC News Nightline. Reporting from Washington, Ted Koppel.
There was a time 30 to 40 years ago when it was quite common for the American driver, especially cruising along a country road, to simply toss his sandwich wrappers, soda bottles, or cigarette butts out the car window. Yes, fines eventually made a difference, but what really began to clean up our national highways was an intensive, drawn-out anti-littering campaign. President Johnson's wife, Lady Bird, put her prestige behind the campaign. And while it did take many years to raise public consciousness on the subject, it worked. But littering, after all, may be a symptom of laziness and sloppiness. It is not an addiction. What we're going to address tonight is the question of whether drug addiction can be avoided or prevented or even ended by the frequent showing of anti-drug messages, particularly on television. Whether or not it works, it is certainly being tried all over the world.
Okay, last time. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs.
注射ばかりではなく、ロケットとか金魚という飲む覚醒剤も出回っています。
Should have stopped before, when you still could.
It's all right. I can handle it. No problem. No problem. No problem.
Don't try heroin in any form. Not even once. It will ruin your life.
Doing drugs is like being on top of the world. Everyone says so. Everyone seems to be having one dandy old time.
It's almost impossible to gauge the effects of advertising of this type, because dramatic impact is one thing.
You just better know what you're jumping into.
Changing people's behavior is another. Whether or not any of these commercials would be influential with drug users, I am afraid I have big doubts. I doubt they would.
Advertising can affect the attitudes that drive the behavior. We won't see the behavioral change for at least, I think, another 12 months. But as soon as we can change these attitudes, behavior will change.
Heroin? I don't know what all this fuss is about. I could handle it.
I think the English ads are particularly effective in that they capture very well the feeling of drug addiction, and they put across the anti-drug addiction case very dramatically.
There's no way I'm going to become an addict. I just do heroin.
It's no problem.
Look, I've got this thing under control. Just got a touch of flu today.
Everyone thinks they can control heroin until it starts to control them.
Anti-drug advertising changes the climate of opinion in the country. For instance, in the 1960s, in particular in the 1970s, pop groups took drugs. It was quite famous that they did. They boasted about it. Nowadays, they couldn't do that. There have been, because of the television advertising campaigns, no public figure will come out and say, I take drugs, it's great, it's fun.
I'm a genius. Yeah, crack will make you feel like that for exactly 10 minutes. Then you crash, and the craving starts.
Danger is that you have to think, who am I appealing to? And I don't know whether 15-year-olds identify with Bette Midler. And I don't imagine Bette Midler would be too worried if I said that she looked like somebody's mum rather than like a crack user or potential crack user herself.
Say no to drugs.
The use of famous people to persuade youngsters not to take drugs seems to me misguided. The kind of young people who are going to take drugs will say, well, it's okay for them, they're rich and famous, they can easily say they wouldn't take drugs. The Israeli ad is heavy-handed, But the lesson that it's trying to put across, which is that your family will be upset if you take drugs, is a real argument that worries young people.
There's a very widespread fear that young people get led into using drugs because they don't have the courage of their convictions. They feel it's difficult to say no. This ad is one of the rather better ones at handling this. And the bottom line with these commercials is whether they deter people from experimenting with drugs or whether they persuade people who are using drugs to stop. And evidence from all over the galaxy suggests that they do not.
Later, we'll talk with former Miami running back Mercury Morris, who knows firsthand the problems drug abuse can cause. But first, we'll hear from an opponent of anti-drug ad campaigns, Lawrence Wallach of the University of California School of Public Health, and from an ad campaign organizer, Thomas Hedrick.
This is ABC News Nightline, brought to you by Honda.
Honda Accord Coupe. It's music to your eyes.
It's tough to keep up appearances on the road unless you pack the Steam Valet from Sunbeam. It's ready to give you that just-pressed look whenever you're pressed for time.
I'm on my way.
The Steam Valet Garment Steamer from Sunbeam.
What's that fragrance you're wearing?
Make a statement without saying a word.
This little bear is very loving, and what he has inside is full of love. A brilliant diamond solitaire engagement ring. Another great gift idea, only from Ben Bridge. This little fellow is full of colorful excitement. Inside is an elegant ruby, emerald, or sapphire ring just for her. Another great gift idea, only from Ben Bridge. This little fellow holds a very timely gift for men. Tucked inside is a handsome man's bull of a watch with up-to-the-minute styling. Another great gift idea from Ben Bridge.
I was petrified to go to my first meeting.
The thought of going to an AA meeting was like saying I was an alcoholic.
Walked in.
And
I saw the coffee pot, poured myself a cup, and sat down on the back.
The only thing I was told by a friend of mine, you have to listen. Shut my big mouth and listen.
Well, I guess I thought they'd look down on me because I was still drinking, but they didn't. You see, you just have to want to stop drinking, and eventually I did.
Alcoholics Anonymous. It works. Look us up in the phone book.
Tomorrow on the American agenda, kids with AIDS, homeless, selling their bodies. What one city is doing to fight it on ABC's World News Tonight with Peter Jennings.
Lawrence Wallach is an associate professor at the School of Public Health of the University of California at Berkeley and a specialist on substance abuse in the media. He is with us in our San Francisco bureau. Thomas Hedrick, who's in our New York studios, is executive director of the Media Advertising Partnership for a Drug-Free America, a volunteer coalition of the U.S. advertising industry and the media. The coalition has been involved since 1985 in donating talent, time, and space for a nationwide anti-drug abuse advertising campaign. Mr. Wallach, let me see if I understand your position correctly. You feel that none of these ads is successful, some are more successful than others, or even that some of them are dangerous?
Well, let me put this in perspective. I'm not really an opponent of these kinds of campaigns. My point is you have to put these campaigns into perspective. What does media really do? And I think media is good for increasing awareness, stimulating public discussion, getting things on the public agenda. On the other hand, if you're looking to media campaigns to really deal with serious social and public health problems like drug abuse, you're really putting your money in the wrong place. These problems are linked to other kinds of issues in society: poverty, alienation, isolation of populations, other kinds of more deeper underlying problems that need to be addressed. Sometimes by focusing too much on the media and looking at that as a magic bullet, it deflects our attention away from dealing with some of these more difficult social, economic, and political issues that must be addressed.
All right. Mr. Hedrick, I hear you coughing or harumphing there a little bit in the background. Let me give you something to harumph about, because we're going to show one of the public service announcements that I believe you're responsible for, and it is probably one of the best known in the country, and I want you to tell us now how effective you feel that particular ad has been. Let's take a look at it right now.
Is there anyone out there who still isn't clear about what doing drugs does? Okay, last time. This is your brain. This is drugs. This is your brain on drugs. Any questions?
Now, I got to tell you, Mr. Hedrick, that it is one of the simplest, it seems to me, most effective ads you could possibly do, but is there any evidence to suggest that it's had an effect either in terms of getting people off drugs or preventing them from going on drugs? And how can you tell?
Well, I think there's two answers to that, Ted. The first one is the relevance of the message to the people to whom the advertising is targeted, and to teens and older preteens who we have shared the advertising with. The vast majority feel it gives them a little bit different perspective on the problem of drugs and helps them think about it in a little bit different way, which really great advertising always does, presents new information or presents it in a new way. We are not trying to gauge the effectiveness of individual commercials, but rather the cumulative effect of the entire campaign. Because quite frankly, there is no one collection of words. There is no one magic visual. There is no one magic wand, if you will, that's going to solve this problem.
Let me interrupt for a second, because I understand what you're saying, but by the same token, in any form of advertising, you know how and why and in what particular fashion you're going to try to target your audience. You do a little bit of testing beforehand.
Absolutely.
You had some goal in mind. I mean, that ad was written not just because some genius copywriter sat there and said, boy, that'd be a terrific way to do it, but presumably because there was some evidence to suggest that this was a useful way of doing it.
Absolutely, and the development of all this work came after more than a year's worth of homework with the top drug experts and research experts in the country, including the National Institute on Drug Abuse, in which we tried to isolate the problem and look at drugs specifically as opposed to talking about drugs in general. Talk about targeting specific ads to specific audiences, as you said. The reasons for preteens to take marijuana are totally different than a reason that teen wants to use cocaine. And the intent of this one was primarily to teens and help them think about drugs in a little bit different way. It is a dramatic visual, as you said, and very simple, with some, I think, some compelling sound effects. I don't believe, however, that again, I think the whole point is that no one ad, no one commercial, whether in television or print, is going to solve the problem. But we know from sharing this qualitatively with teens that it does help in the process of what we call denormalization. It helps them to think of drugs no longer as just an accepted part of social behavior.
Mr. Wallach, if what one is trying to do, and basically I think that's what we are trying to do in the United States these days, is change attitudes, is at least not make drugs seem to be as palatable as they were perhaps 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Can't you concede that at least some progress has been made and that some of these ads may even contribute toward that progress?
Well, not only has some progress been made, but the trend in hardened attitudes towards drugs and also reductions in drug use have been going down since the late 1970s. You know, let me also just point out another thing. I'm saying that the media plays a part, an important part in increasing information and awareness, but we can't expect much more from it. One of the problems I have with this campaign is it totally ignores alcohol, for example. Drunk driving accidents, as you probably know, is the leading cause of death among teenagers in our country. It totally ignores cigarette smoking, which ultimately will kill an enormous amount of kids as they grow older in our society. And I think that if we're going to be serious about drugs in this society, we have to look at a broader context.
Well, in fairness, I must say, I've seen public service announcements that are anti-smoking. I've seen public service announcements that are you know, alcohol consumption, particularly in connection with driving. Haven't you seen the same ones?
Yeah, no, I've seen them. I'm wondering why this campaign, with its very high visibility and its $500 million worth of time that it's had the networks and local stations donate, much to their credit, by the way, I'm wondering why they haven't dealt with alcohol.
First of all, I think it's only about 30% of that credit. I think it's about $150 million worth of time, but we'll come back to that point also.
Their press says $500 million, I think.
We need to take a little break. When we come back, we'll discuss different approaches to coping with drug abuse with a former user who's now determined to help others, former Miami Dolphin, Mercury Morris.
A fender bender on the freeway.
You?
No, a guy, anyone. This is just to show how Wang's integrated image system would handle a claim. Adjuster comes out, takes a picture of the fender, signs off an adjustment, handwritten document, photograph, an image. I'll go back to home office via electronic mail. Touch a button, then you got a data window, text window, image window right in front of you. A guy in the field wants to verify the estimate. Click. The adjuster's handwritten report and the photo are on the screen, processed in half the time. That's integrated imaging, and Wang has it. Another example, customer service. A guy calls EBC.
Shoot some slices, salad shooter. Shoot some shreds, salad shooter. Shoot some salad, shoot it fast, shoot it pretty, pretty salad shooter.
Presto Salad Shooter, slicer, shredder. Easier than a food processor. Just point and shoot slices right onto a salad. Shoot shreds right onto a pizza. Top a dessert, go a little nutty. Clean up with a wipe and a rinse, small enough to store anywhere.
Shoot some salad, shoot it fast, shoot it pretty, pretty salad shooter.
From Presto. To get juicy, flavorful steaks takes marinating. To get a superior marinade takes an abundance of select ingredients and a large supply of time. Presenting a better way, Lee & Perrin's Worcestershire sauce. Its rare, naturally aged ingredients make for a mouth-watering marinade that takes as little as 20 minutes. So for more flavorful, juicy steaks in only 20 minutes, Lee & Perrin's has it all wrapped up. The original, genuine Worcestershire sauce.
If you want yesterday's music to sound more up-to-date, stop listening to it on yesterday's stereo. Come to Chelsea Audio Video. You can move up to this stunning Bang & Olufsen turntable for as little as $199, or enjoy the perfect sound of a Yamaha compact disc player, also just $199. Either one can bring any music back to life. Chelsea Audio Video, the one place where you just can't go wrong.
Brooks Dalton here with Susan Isaacs and her latest book, Shining Through. It's a love story, isn't it, Susan?
Yes. It's about a passionate, gutsy woman who put her life on the line during World War II. Look, some do it for glory. She did it for love.
Shining Through. It's witty. It's romantic.
It's yours.
Oh.
Shining Through, published at $18.95, now just $15.99 at B. Dalton Bookseller.
You can call me Books.
America's worst enemy may be our own weapons.
So on some of those missiles, they're not sure whether they'll hit Washington or Moscow.
The Business of Defense, Flaws in the Shield, Thursday.
Tomorrow, the surprising results of astrology put to the test.
Also, what you can do at home to help clean up the environment.
Plus, China Beach star Dana Delaney on Good Morning America.
Eugene Mercury Morris, who is with us now from Spokane, Washington, is a former running back for the Miami Dolphins and a three-time Super Bowl veteran. He served 3 years in Florida's Dade County Correctional Institution following his 1982 conviction for trafficking in cocaine. Morris has done an anti-drug television commercial and also speaks around the country about his experience with drugs, which is why he is in Spokane tonight. Separate this for me into two categories. Can you see these ads doing any good whatsoever to a kid who's already on drugs?
No, I can't. Not subjectively seeing anything happen as far as a positive nature is concerned from that individual ad. But I can see the concept of long enough. If you continue that concept, then it's going to sink into some people. But what the focal point in here is I think that we've misunderstood the concept here of this problem. The problem is not about drugs. I've heard drug abuse, drug treatment, drug counseling, drug interdiction. Nowhere have we mentioned the most valuable aspect of the problem, and that's the individual. And going back to what Mr. Wallach said, I agree with him about the concept of this problem being greater than just drugs. It's a problem that goes through all the society, goes throughout all the communities in a society. It is not extracted from any one society and put in another. It is here in the United States, and we have to deal with that with the concept of the choice not the drug. Cocaine,
I don't think
may
there's,
sound...
forgive me, I don't think there's any question about that, and that's almost a subject for another broadcast. What I'm really asking and what we're trying to focus on tonight is what, if any, effect, positive or negative, do these ads have? Now, I asked you about kids already on drugs. What about the 11-year-old, 12-year-old, 13-year-old who grows up seeing these public service announcements day after day after day after day? Is that likely to give him or her the kind of crutch that he needs to say, boy, this really doesn't look like a very good idea. I don't think I want to do this.
No, it won't. And it goes back to the exact same thing I started out initially talking about, and that was the concept of the use of an individual using drugs rather than the concept of the importance of the drug itself. This is your brain on drugs, and this is what happens when you're... This doesn't happen to everybody. This doesn't happen to every individual. So you can't use scare tactics in that concern to try and induce someone to stop doing something. You brought up a good point about litter. I use that in my lectures to kids across the country because what was raised was the conscious awareness level of individuals by the ads that were put on back in those days, because the $500 fine signs that you saw all over the country, those signs were put there and there was a ton of litter underneath the sign. So that showed really no respect for that concept. But when we began to change as a country, because we were, as it was, trashing ourselves from the outside in, now we are trashing ourselves from the inside out. So we need to have a group analysis of this and find out what it is that makes us do these things rather than the stopping of drugs in society. You're not going to extract drugs from society and make it better.
Go ahead.
I
can't tell who was trying to jump in there, but go ahead.
You can't really compare the drug problem with the litter problem. People don't litter for the kinds of reasons that people use drugs. And I think we need to look at the role that media can play, and it can play a role. It can't substitute for a national policy on drugs. It can't substitute for economic development at the local level, the development of resources to provide people with full opportunities, better education, and all of these other things. See, the problem I have with our sole use of the media or overemphasis of the media is we tend to do that instead of doing other things. We tend to use the media almost as an easy way out, so we don't have to deal with these very serious issues.
Now, I'm going to stop you there because I think you misunderstood what I said about litter. Litter and drugs obviously are not the same, but the concept of why one makes the choice not to litter is the same. Because you can do anything you want, you can say anything you want, you can have all kind of ads that have drugs, eggs frying in pans and all that, but that's not relevant to the point of the individual finally having to make the choice. In '64, he had to make the choice of picking up the litter and putting it in the basket. In '88, he has to make the choice of not picking up the drug. So the choice aspect becomes the most valuable aspect in this whole thing.
I like that idea. And if we can agree that, in fact, it's easier to make a choice to not litter or not use drugs when you have a stake in the future, when you feel that you have opportunity at the local level, when you can fulfill the promise that any citizen should be able to fulfill in this country, then it's much easier to make a choice not to use drugs.
I agree with you 100%.
Gentlemen, hold on just a second. Let me bring Mr. Hedrick back into this for just a moment.
Please.
First of all, is it $150 million or $500 million worth of time that the networks and newspapers and radio stations have?
$150 million is what we have received so far.
Now,
$500 million is our objective.
Okay. You think that $150 million has been wasted money? Well, obviously you don't think it has, but after listening to what these two gentlemen have to say, you're starting to have any second thoughts?
No, none whatsoever. I think you go back to the, rather than making drug abuse a problem that has roots so deep that no one can ever trace them, I think we got to look at the things that drive the problem. And I think we've been able to isolate certain areas, not just us, but many other experts. The number of children 9 to 12 who see drug users as popular, which is pretty close to 40%. The number of parents that believe, well over 55%, that their children will never be exposed to or try illegal drugs, despite the fact that we know that almost 60% use illegal drugs by the time they finish high school.
I want to hear some more of those statistics, but if you'd be good enough just to hold on to them for a second, we'll come back with all three of you to conclude when we continue our discussion in a moment.
Choose to make a difference.
Reach out and touch somebody's hand. Make this world a better place if you can.
Every time you reach for MasterCard from now through December, we'll donate money to 6 worthy causes, and you can help choose where the money goes.
Reach out and touch somebody's hand.
Choose to make a difference. Choose MasterCard.
What do I do to make my husband smile? I tickle his ribs. Lowry's seasoned salt. It's the perfect touch, because it's the original.
Up to $1,000 cash back on a Subaru is worth more because Subaru's XT6 has the same engine design found in a Ferrari. Because the Subaru Justy is the lowest priced four-wheel drive passenger car in America. Up to $1,000 cash back from Subaru means a great deal on a great car.
Why do you care what I eat for breakfast?
Maybe we shouldn't discuss this while you're under the influence of sugar and preservatives.
And what should I be influenced by? Nuts and twigs?
Kellogg's Nutri-Grain cereal with no sugar added and no preservatives.
This is much better than I thought.
Yeah, kind of like me.
Dedicated to the ones we love.
Now find out for yourself why the better taste of Nutri-Grain nuggets makes it the best tasting nugget.
The shower massage by Teledyne Waterpick.
Continuing our discussion now with our three guests, Thomas Hedrick, you were just giving us a few of the statistics that drive what it is you're trying to do.
Yes, to repeat, I think, and there's no one, there are groups by different age groups. I think one of the things that we find with preteens, for example, is an important factor is the high number of kids who believe that drug users are popular and that they can be popular. It's an inducing attitude that I will feel more grown up if I use drugs, that I will use drugs if my friends do is a good predictor. And I think that what we can do is help address some of those attitudes and change the revulsion we all feel in attitudes where there's a pusher at school and translate it more personally. Have I talked to my children? Have I waited until they're 17 and way past when they've been exposed? Do I have a friend that I have turned my head to even though I know that they call themselves a recreational user, but I know they can be in trouble? And translate that.
This is all well and good, and I think it's a nice idea, but I think what we have to remember is we don't want to define this strictly as an individual problem where we're blaming the person with the problem. We have to realize that people are growing up in a certain context that needs to be addressed.
Gentlemen, we're down to our last 45 seconds, so go ahead, Mr. Hedrick, then I want to go to Mercury Morris.
In no way, shape, or form, we've been very careful to avoid condemning the person. We are trying to condemn the behavior. And our research shows clearly that we have been able to drive the attitudes that lead to trial in the good direction.
Mercury Morris, a quick question to you, and ironically, you've done one of these PSAs yourself. Does it make any sense for famous people to do these ads? Does that make any difference?
I don't think that the point about the person being famous is. I think that the point is if someone has something that subjective to say to these individuals and they earnestly mean it. Now, it's one thing for Nancy Reagan, I mean no disrespect, it's one thing for her to go around and talking about the horrors of drugs, but in actuality, she knows nothing about this. And the kids that she talks to, they know this also. You got to give kids respect. And you got to give them understanding and not shake the tree, so to speak, in terms of them not being able to understand what's going on around them. You cannot abuse a drug. A drug is not an abusable item.
On that note, gentlemen, I'm afraid I have to thank you all very much for being with us tonight. Fascinating discussion, fascinating subject, and I'm deeply appreciative to all three of you for coming in.
Thank you. Thank you, Ted.
That's our report for tonight. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
This has been Nightline.
This has been a presentation of ABC News, where more Americans get their news than from any other source.
To get through a day of school, I either had to take speed in the morning or get high.
Studies show a correlation between drug abuse and low literacy skills.
I don't think I had the responsibility to go to school at that point. I couldn't be there. I didn't do my homework if I was there. I was failing, so why be there? If I wouldn't have finished high school, I wouldn't feel very good about myself right now. I wouldn't feel like I could complete anything.
Literacy. Our future begins with basic skills.
Tomorrow.
I used to be going out with this girl, Winnie Cooper. We broke up.
Oh, Winnie, she's pretty cute. A little flat, but cute. Kevin likes them flat.
The Emmy-winning Wonder Years is back. Then, TV Guide called it a delight. It won the Emmy Award for Best Direction. John Ritter brings Hooperman back. 2 season premieres tomorrow.